Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the host for today's episode. With me today is Georg Digel. Did I say your last name right?
Digel sounds better, but it's fine.
Okay. With me today is Georg Digel. Uh, we're going to be talking about CAPAs and how to set up an effective CAPA program. Georg is a seasoned CAPA expert with over a decade of hands-on experience in the medtech space. Some of us call him the CAPA guy because Georg posts quite a bit on LinkedIn about CAPAs. In fact, if you don't follow him, you should follow him because he gives very specific advice about the corrective action and preventive actions. He helps organizations avoid costly audit findings and implement effective CAPA systems. So, from harmonizing processes across 60 global sites to training over 1,000 professionals, Georg's insights stem from a lot of years, I'm assuming, of painful mistakes. At least that's been my experience with CAPA, but remarkable successes as well. And his mission is to ensure your CAPA process isn't just compliant, but actually impacts the organization. So, Georg, how are you doing? What did I miss?
I'm doing fine, and you did it much better than I could have done it. So thanks for that.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you freely sharing your knowledge on LinkedIn. It's really fun to watch what you post and to see the interactions on there. Um, but how to set up an effective CAPA program? Maybe what we could start with just talking about what CAPA is and what it isn't.
Yeah, that's a good way to start it. So the thing is, how it should be, is that the CAPA system is, yeah, obviously a part of your quality management system, one of the most important ones, because the intent is to solve either the high risk issues within your company or systemic issues, right? And with that, the first questions might start: what is a high risk issue? What is a systemic issue? The way I try to look at it is, if you're a company, you could break it down into three steps. Step one would be identify all your events, your CAPA triggers, I call them, so you know what at which when should I follow up, basically. Afterwards, if you escalate your event to the CAPA system, then the question is, how do I execute it properly? So how do I solve the issue? How do I implement meaningful action? And how do I prove that the action taken was effective? And afterwards, if I'm done with my CAPA, I need to have some kind of governance within my company. So the questions should be, obviously, was the CAPA effective? But maybe it could also be in the terms of, do problems which I solved in the past come back? Do I see real improvement within my company, or was it just wasted time?
Yeah, so those different phases or I guess aspects of a CAPA system, that's interesting. And I wonder if there's one that stands out to you as more poorly implemented than others. For example, when I think about the CAPA triggers, I used to work in a drug delivery combination product company, and I remember the tension between pharma and medical device in that seemed like they wanted to open a CAPA for everything. But
Yeah.
on the far on the opposite end of the spectrum, medical device, we didn't want to open a CAPA for anything. And so somewhere in the middle seemed to be the safer ground. But I wonder if you could kind of speak to those triggers and the tendency to open or not open CAPAs.
Yeah. I think we can start with two things, which are reality for many companies. And the first thing is death by CAPA, and the other thing is never opening a CAPA at all. Right. And I'm not super firm with the pharma industry, but the way I understand the medical devices world is that we can have risk management, or we should even use risk management for those decisions. And the companies I worked with in the past, or if I get my questions on LinkedIn, one of the more frequent questions is about the CAPA triggers. And if you work for a time in the medical device world, then you will see there are some easy answers. So let's say you have a patient death. Out of your complaint handling system, you see some, or maybe not even death, but there was a serious injury. And you would immediately say, hey, we can't tolerate that. We should open up a CAPA for that. There might be things like product recalls. So if you want to get 2,000 of your product back, then the vice president of quality or also the CEO might be interested in what happened here?
Yeah.
Another easy one could be the external audit finding, or maybe a finding, or let's say observation out of an FDA investigation. Those are the easy ones. But afterwards, there's always a lot of room for discussion. And this is where I see the most ambiguity, hard word. I'm not English, right?
Ambiguity. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. This is where I see that happens because it's also a level of subjectivity. It's dependent on the maturity of your company. So what I've seen is the internal audit system as a valuable feeding system to CAPA. It could be or should be everything related to control of non-conforming product. And then there are a lot of questions, right? And I think the biggest improvement here, which you can have as a company, is to really sit down, look at your feeding systems or the overall processes your company has, and try to understand in which of those processes could I identify triggers to escalate to CAPA, right?
Yeah.
That's the yeah, that's the first question. But afterwards, there's also this part about high risk and systemic issue I mentioned. So it might be that out of your internal audit, you identify that you have a lot of records which are not signed or approved. If it's every record, the question is easier to answer. But let's say you find one record out of in 1,000. Is it really worth to initiate a CAPA for that? Right? And this is where the discussion needs to happen with the quality management team, but also with the functional areas.
So one of the things that I think about when I think about CAPA is root cause analysis.
Yeah.
And it's not isolated to CAPA, but for example, the illustration you gave, 1 out of 1,000, it may not necessarily be elevated to a CAPA, but there could still be a minor root cause analysis done just to see, well, why did this happen?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that and where root cause analysis plays roles and some of the best ways to do those things?
Yeah. So what I've seen over the years is that there's a lot of philosophical discussions around that. And the way I was taught it, and I learned a lot of the things I do with Johnson and Johnson. So it's a big medtech and pharma player, and they are obviously more tailored to FDA requirements than to the ISO standards. And the way I learned it was if you're in your NC system, you don't really do a root cause investigation. You try to find out what the assignable cause was, but then you stop after correction, usually. If you're in the CAPA system, then you go definitely for root cause investigation because the idea of the CAPA system is to identify the root cause and ideally eliminate it or at least mitigate it to an acceptable area so that the non-conformity due to this root cause doesn't happen too often anymore. Now, if you look at the ISO standard, it's not exactly stated like that, right? So what the ISO standard says is you have a chapter on improvement. It should be 851, I think. Sorry if it's not that one,
I don't
but
have
I
it in
think
front
it's,
of me either. Yeah.
yeah, it should be 851. And what it basically says is if you are in the corrective action subchapter or subpart, you try to identify the causes of a nonconformity. Same for preventive action. So it doesn't really separate when to do an investigation if you look
Right.
in the ISO standard. But if you look at different chapters, example giving for the at the one with the control of non-conforming product, it wants to have you give an evaluation whether you had the need for investigation, right? And this is the world where I live in, that you have this constant discussion, do I need to do an investigation or not, right?
Yeah. That makes sense. And then the implementation, you kind of gave some different steps, the triggers, the investigation, and then the implementation of
Yeah,
those. Can you speak to that and some of the downfalls that companies get into when they try to implement corrective actions?
sure. So maybe I can even go one or two steps back. So let's assume we are clear on the trigger. and we want to open up a CAPA for it. A common way to handle it or to deal with it is to have a so-called problem statement. So it's about what do I try to solve in my company, and what is associated with it is the so-called CAPA scope. So in the CAPA scope, you're clear about the product that is affected, the processes. If you're in a multi-site setup, then maybe which sites are affected or which regions. And the CAPA scope, together with the problem statement, gives you like an intro to your story, basically, right? And this is the first step where I see many people mess up. So the idea of the problem statement is that you can read it and then it's crystal clear what the CAPA is about, right? So there are different frameworks to do it. There's 4W2Hs, is not analysis. So there are many things to do it, but the ideal output would be something on a date, a certain function identified following issue. We know it's an issue because it's deviating from a requirement. The requirement is either in an ISO standard or in the regulation or in the process description. This is how often it happened. That means we need to definitely follow up. So something like that. And the CAPA scope would say we only found it for product A and site C, right? So if you're an external auditor or you're an investigator, that you get a feeling for what does this company try to solve right now. The next step would be about current containment or initial corrections, initial actions. And this is already where I see a lot of confusion happening, because the term correction and corrective action doesn't
Yeah.
seem to be too clear.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that for a moment?
Yeah.
So correction versus corrective, how do
Yeah.
you define them? And maybe where do we go to define those?
Yeah. So the best way to define that would be the ISO standard. It's in the 9000. The ISO standard, the 9001 is for all the definitions. If you're in the medical device world, it's also going to be in 13485. And the reason why I give you that reference is because the QMSR will incorporate the 13485 within their regulation. So I think, especially for the folks who only have experience with the American world, it could be a lot of benefit to read the ISO 13485.
Right.
And what you'll find in there is that the correction is the action taken to eliminate a nonconformity, and the corrective action would be the action taken to address the cause of this nonconformity.
And can you give a concrete example so it's just a little easier to understand? So
Yeah,
I'll let you come up with an example.
yeah. So my favorite example is actually from the production environment. So imagine you have a manufacturing line, and the idea, so the output of this process would be to have a certain part which should be 6 centimeters long. I'm from Germany, right? Centimeters, whatever that is in
Sure.
inch. And then you identify, because you have your in-process control, that all of your parts start to be 7 centimeters. This is obviously a nonconformity, right? It's not the specified 6 centimeters, it's the 7 centimeters. You would stop the production. You would say, hey, I can't do anything here. You put your NC tag on it. You have your red band across it. You have your communication that no one touches the machine. No one does anything. This would be a containment action, because it prevents the current NC from spreading, from being pushed out to the next process step. Actually, you don't find a definition for containment, right? But many people and companies still use this term. So that's also the reason why I talk about that.
Yeah.
And the question about what is the correction? If it's possible, you would cut down the part. So it's 7 centimeters right now, should be 6 centimeters. So you take it, you cut it down to 6 centimeters. That's it. That's the correction part. Now, about the corrective action part. With this cutting down, you didn't address the cause, right? So if you don't look into the machine, maybe the setting is wrong or maybe something else had a hiccup, then the machinery will continue producing 7 centimeter long parts. So you go into your root cause investigation. You should have your due diligence. You try to separate symptoms from contributing factors from root causes. And maybe you find out that the parameters were inaccurate. So you had a software update. After the software update, all parameters have been messed up. No one checked it. And due to that, you had the 7 centimeter long parts. And I think at that point, it gets confusing already, because what is actually the root cause? Was it that the machine did have the wrong parameters, or was it that the software update resulted in incompliant outputs, let's say,
Yeah.
right? From my point of view, you still need to address both, but the contributing factor would be adjusting the right parameters again. The root cause in this scenario was that the software update process was not done in a due diligent manner, right? So you need to address this software update process.
Yeah. And so and maybe we can take this on to the preventive action as well, because I think there's a really example that could potentially be extrapolated out. So your corrective action, maybe we'll go all the way and say IT needs to work with product development anytime there's a software update, and they have to do a full due diligence analysis or whatever on
Yeah.
this. So the preventive action, are there any preventive actions that could be taken from this?
Yeah. And this will lead to a lot of debate whether it's possible to come up with meaningful preventive action. And one of the first arguments against it would be the root cause already happened, right? Or the cause, the non-conformity. Let me be specific. The non-conformity happened. And that's also the big separation between corrective and preventive action. Corrective action is to prevent the recurrence of non-conformity. You had these 7 centimeter long parts. It already happened. So every action that you will take will be corrective when it addresses the root cause. A different one would be there were never 7 centimeter long parts which came out, but you identified there's this threat that it might happen. This would have been a preventive action because it addressed the cause of a first time occurrence of a nonconformity. Going back to this specific example, I see some companies bounded based on production lines, products, maybe even different sites. So they would say it only happened for manufacturing line 1, but I know that the software update process happens for my other machinery too. So I will check all other machines, whether the programs are still accurate and the parameters are valid. And if I see that it's fine, that this would be preventive action. Other companies or processes try to do it that way, that they separate per QMS. So if you're in a multi-site setup and you have separate QMS, so it means also with own certificate, that you'll say, hey, I had this issue at site A, site B, C, D, please cross-check, do an internal gap assessment. If you find out anything, this would be good preventive action, as long as no non-conformity happened yet.
Yeah.
At site B, C, D.
And I think about this preventive action in some different ways. I've heard people they try to turn it around from CAPA to PACA and say we should focus more on preventive action. But I don't even know if that's practical or possible. Or what are your thoughts on that?
I guess that's one of the most challenging questions in the overall CAPA program the company has. So how to identify preventive action in meaningful manner. What I read often and heard often is link it to risk management. But for me, it's always, what does it exactly mean? Right? Because if you look into a company and you have your risk management file and you have your complaint handling data and you have your internal process controls and you see how much scrap you have and whatever else, the idea is that you constantly update your risk management files and that you have the reference. So if you're a complaint handling unit, you have the direct access to the risk management file.
Right.
Right? Or if you're in the quality assurance group, you always have access to the risk management file. I never seen this link being implemented in a meaningful way. Maybe I did. I'm too dumb to
No, no,
identify.
I think it's common across the medical device industry. I think you're exactly, yeah,
Yeah, it's just that I don't know what it exactly should mean, right? With this turn it around to PACA, because you need to have so many prerequisites to do it. So what you could think of is, if you have strong tracking and trending data analytics, so you have the ideal overview of your production data. Let's say you have like an alarming limit, and you have like this upper and lower process specification, and you see you have a negative trend, and so maybe it's coming closer and closer to the warning limit, or also to the upper specification. And if you could identify it, implement preventive action because you didn't breach the upper limit or the lower limit yet,
yeah,
this would be a meaningful preventive action. But I just think many people underestimate how challenging it is to do it in a meaningful manner, and also with a pragmatic approach, without hiring 100 data analysts or the most expensive software there is, right? So there are too many challenges associated to that. And don't get me wrong, I don't say don't think about preventive action. I just say this term, turn it around to PACA, comes with more challenges than people might
yeah.
think.
Yeah, you talk about approaching that lower limit on a tolerance band, or let's say you're drilling a hole and the hole seems to be getting a little bit bigger as you go
Yeah,
parts go through. Maybe or maybe the drill is starting to wobble, or maybe if it's getting smaller, maybe the tool is wearing down. But I guess I feel like this should be captured to a certain extent with continuous improvement efforts. Yes,
yeah,
those are typically applied to manufacturing efficiency, but it could also be applied to design iteration. We talk about risk-based approach.
yeah,
Researching risk, like you said, it's part of medical device development. So the search to prevent issues can be a little asymptotic.
yeah,
You can't actually ever reach it, perfection, which doesn't mean you shouldn't try, obviously. But yeah, that's one of the difficulties that I've seen.
yeah,
Okay, what about what are some meaningful primitive actions? Are there any uh, one thing that I think about, because you mentioned some of the data analytics and different things, customer feedback, post-market surveillance could be part of that. What about learnings from other companies, headlines, news, things like
yeah.
that? Is that applicable, or what are the thoughts there?
I think that's one of the most meaningful and easiest ways for a company. So especially with the FDA, they're quite transparent with what they find, right? So if someone requested in 483, you might find it on the database. Warning letters are published without any requests on the database. So what you could do is either look for similar competitors, like the company you have or you work for, and then see what does the other company have in terms of recalls, or also 483s warning letters. And especially with the 483s, you can cross check. So you find so many
Yeah,
deviations against NC and CAPA, for example, and you could just look at it and then say, okay, this company forget to verify the effectiveness of implemented actions. How good is my company with that, right? For example, or also the overall external audit program, or FDA, yeah, inspection management program. If you have a bigger company and you get a finding for one side, for one QMS, it's quite smart to let the other QMSs do an internal gap assessment, right?
you mentioned verification of effectiveness check, and I'll just throw one thing out there. When you look at those 483s, the FDA also posts kind of an analysis of how many 483s and for what their reasons were, and
Yeah,
CAPA is consistently one of the top three. And so
yeah,
that's a great place to go look and see why these companies are getting those 483s. I kind of want to emphasize what you said there. But the verification of effectiveness check, I want to ask what your opinions are there, and I want to just share briefly before you answer.
yeah,
I can remember a haunting day when I used to, as a manufacturing engineer, I managed a few different CAPAs, some that I inherited, some that I had to were on my product line. And I remember the quality assurance coordinator. Her name was Hannah. She came 6 months after I thought we'd solve this problem, said, "Hey, do we have that verification of effectiveness?" And we had decided what that was going to be. And I just remember thinking, oh no, I've got to go check and make sure it actually worked. And I was a little bit dreading going out to the floor. It worked, but what are some the good, the bad, and the ugly about VOEs and verification of effectiveness checks?
Yeah. So I would even add two things before that. And technically, even before you implement actions, you should do a so-called verification and validation of the actions paired with a negative impact assessment or adverse effect assessment. So I think this causes a lot of confusion because I see people throw everything into one bucket. So it's this verification and validation part, the negative impact assessment, it's the verification of effectiveness, and the verification of implementation. And this will also link now to the challenges and the ugly parts about it. So let's go back to our example we just talked about. Let's say it was not the software, but you decided that your current production process, is not capable to do any conforming compliant parts anymore. So you would change the process. Before you can use the process, you need to validate it, right? Or if you don't need to validate it, at least you need to verify the output, that the output will meet predetermined specification. This is one part of the CAPA process, but I see many people missing it. Next thing would be this negative impact assessment. So you come up with an action, you also know how you would verify or validate it, but you should assess whether the implementation of this action would negatively impact my QMS, my product, or maybe the ability to meet regulatory requirements. So it's written in the QSR. It's also written in or specified in the ISO, and also if you look at the QSIT, so like this inspection quality system inspection. What is the T?
Technique.
Technique. Yeah, thanks. So you also see that the investigators need to check this, right? Whether the company did it or not. And if I give you an example, so let's say you had a complaint and the root cause showed that people misplaced the screws, right? So there are three holes for screws, but they have different diameters, but the diameter is so close that you can also pick the wrong hole. And you think the easiest way would be to use color coding. So you implement a color coding and you have a yellow screw going into a yellow hole and green into green, blue into blue. But afterwards, after you've done all of that and you're in your verification of effectiveness check, you realize that you get complaints because you have some residue, right? So you used just some kind of color. You didn't think about it should be bioactive or biocompatible,
Yeah.
right? And then you will have infections coming from the procedures. And this is what the negative impact assessment should catch. That does your action make sense or not? So those are those things before that. So let me summarize the verification validation of the action together with the negative impact assessment. And then the verification of effectiveness part is not a verification of implementation. Right? So what I often see is verification of effectiveness is corrective action is implemented. My CAPA was effective, right? Or process was trained. My CAPA was effective.
Yeah. When in
And
reality, you should be checking to make sure, oh, we've never had this nonconformity. It's no longer an issue.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And if you want to be a little bit more sneaky, you could scope it down to the root cause. So it's not that the overall non-conformity shouldn't happen anymore. It's the combination of the non-conformity due to the root cause, right?
Yes.
And this is linking to the way of phrasing verification of effectiveness criteria. So a common framework to use is the SMART framework, so the one with specific and measurable and all of that. It should be linked back to the initial problem statement. That's also the reason why I'm kind of pedantic about the problem statement and the CAPA scope. But the achievable part should also be in there, right? And sometimes I see VOE criteria that are either so unspecific that everything would pass
Yeah.
it, right? Or it's maybe so strict that no company in the world could achieve it without investing so much money into it that you wouldn't have any money anymore to operate a company,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. No, I like that specificity of applying it to the root cause because that's ultimately the purpose of that verification of effectiveness check. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think, as you were talking, it made me think when we're applying the principles of a CAPA, an effective CAPA program, maybe one of the downfalls of companies is, oh, we're just going to fix this problem. There's a problem. Maybe if the assumption is if we've designed the product correctly, it's run for 5 years appropriately, and something changes, well, then someone did something wrong. Someone broke the system, and that we just got to get the system back to where it was. We forget about some of the external factors. And I'm going to throw an illustration out there and see what you think
yeah,
of this. Let's say you have a surgical piece of equipment that maybe it's a cast aluminum part. And so suppose a regulation in California has changed how the casting process can take place, which invariably offers maybe creates a little bubbles inside the casting so it can break more easily now. But
yeah,
due to the regulation for the actual casting process, you can't get cast parts that don't have those porosity, the high levels of porosity or whatever. Um, or trying to think of another one, if maybe the state of the healthcare has changed, where maybe it's a part that supports a part of the body, maybe a limb when you're doing surgery on the wrist. And they've actually decided you need to put more force on it because it's actually a better procedure if you change the way you apply the force. So now the actual user need has changed. There's no longer, I'm just going to throw something out there, no longer a 50-pound force requirement on your part. Maybe now it's an 80-pound force requirement. So
yeah.
it's not just that the process has always been good and we just got to get back to the original process. There may actually be things that need to change, and we have to understand what the true root cause is. Why are there more breaks in the field? Is it porosity? Is it the standard of healthcare? There's lots of different external factors that could be going on as well that could require change. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'd say that's also one of the reasons why there are so many findings on CAPA overall, right? So it's a quality management system. So it's not that CAPA equals QMS. There's also a lot of other subparts, right? So
Yeah,
you have your complaint handling, your PMS, you have internal audit, and whatever, right? There's so many parts, and just saying, yeah, we changed something, therefore we have now NCs on the market or complaints or whatever. That's a lacking part of problem solving skill,
right.
right? It's like this first idea, and what I also advise against, if you go into root cause analysis, pick your first plausible cause and then address it, right? So it's the very same. And coming back to the 483s, so yes, CAPA is cited since 10 years. I looked one time 10 years back. It has always been top CAPA in the top three. Um, but you can mess up so much with CAPA, right? If you read those 483s, it's you had an initial complaint, and you, in the complaint investigation, you missed to address the fact that it's actually a systemic issue, and then you didn't escalate it in timely manner for corrective action, right? And then it's the thing: is it really a flaw of the CAPA system then, if the investigation in the complaint process was not timely enough or did oversee some patterns? Because usually, if you look especially at bigger companies, those are different departments, right? It's not that the CAPA guys sit in the complaint handling unit or the other way around, right? And just like you said, so you have those requirements with PMS and vigilance program and the complaint handling part, and you see you have an increase of MDRs or MIRs here in Europe, or you just get those signals from the market that maybe you have a race of a failure code, maybe you have more complaints for a product, maybe you have more complaints from a region. Those are signals. The question is then, what do you do with those signals, right? And if you, just like you said, you had the change of a different regulation, therefore the procedure is different. The question is, why was your QMS not capable to identify this change in regulation? Because in an ideal world, I don't know how it is in the QSR, but definitely in the ISO standard, the regulatory affairs team is also responsible to see, not the team alone, right? But your company is responsible to identify changes in different applicable regulations too,
Right.
right? And the ideal world would see, hey, there's one major procedure. All of our products are used for this procedure. They will change the force requirement. This means we need to go to our design team and let them redesign it and go through the whole cycle. Maybe we need to have a field notice to say, hey, don't use product revision B for the new procedure because you will get a product revision C for it. To only use product revision C B for this, and this procedure. This would be the ideal world,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's quite a stretch.
Yeah, it is. It is. We talk in theoretical terms sometimes with the ideal world, but there is the real world as well, in that doctors are a bit of a rebel in that
Yeah.
this is a new thing. We're gonna do this. Just I'm sure it'll take it. But so there's interesting things there. I really enjoyed this conversation. We're gonna have to do this again sometime. Any last piece of advice you want to give the medical device companies out there? Any last places you want to point them, directions you want to take?
Yeah, I would say less is more. And remember that CAPA is a big part of continuous improvement. And what happens is if you escalate every and each issue to the CAPA system, that you will flood your CAPA system with so many also low risk issues that you will look or lose oversight on the important issues. And that's the worst thing which can happen to your company, because it's first and yeah, it's about patient safety, right? Patient safety. And the CAPA system should be there for the really high risk issues, the really systemic issues where you just see that you're in jeopardy for patients' lives, right? So that would be my thing. If you're unsure about your CAPA system as of right now, start to handle the serious ones, the obvious ones, and over time continue the discussions and sharpen your triggers. Be more clear about what needs to be handled via CAPA, let's say via corrective action or preventive action and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Those of you listening, definitely check out Georg's LinkedIn. We'll put links in the show notes so that you can find him. He gives advice nearly every day on how to improve your CAPA system. So really appreciate that. Georg, thank you so much for coming on. I'll let you get back to the rest of your day, but look forward to future conversations. Everybody,
Thanks
take
so much
care.
again. Bye
Bye.
bye.